Alright, hi YouTube. We are live on stream. We just watched the Season 8 Campfire chat that went on for almost 2 hours. I have a lot of notes here that I want to go through, so as is tradition, I'm going to give you my rundown. The patch notes are also out right after this. I have not looked at them yet because they basically just launched and we have some other stuff to go through. And I will have an updated video on that later on. So there might be some stuff that I have in my not mentioned list that might be mentioned in the patch notes. So we'll see. But in general, there is a lot of stuff to go through here in this Season 8 update. First of all, the PTR starts next week on Tuesday. It lasts 1 week. So this is 11th to 18th March. Kind of expected. And there's lots of changes here. So they are reworking parts of the endgame, especially the boss ladders. Gonna go through that in a second. But there are some new friends coming here. So we get Mephisto's doggy. We get Belial, and we get Urivar from the campaign and Vessel of Hatred, for example. So there's some stuff coming here. Then there's like a bunch of like leveling changes, for example, endgame rescaling with the pit, combat updates, tower control changes, and a bunch of class changes. So they have like a new unique, new aspect for every class, and a bunch of like tweaks that they talked about, but not really detailed. So here's just some of the keywords they threw out there in terms of what is getting buffed and what is going to be a thing next season. So we'll see exactly how this will play out. But overall, it seems like build variety is going to increase with especially kind of like very underused skills. But if those are actually good enough to really be the meta, we'll see. So we have to look at the patch notes for that. And then again, a lot of stuff that has not been mentioned yet. That is kind of why I have mixed feelings about this. But overall, I gotta say, what they have shown us, I think was pretty good. It's just that a lot of stuff that they didn't talk about and that they didn't say and that they are probably not changing makes me a bit sad with like, it's, yeah, kind of like business as usual, let's say. You know, we had Season 7, lots of power creep and lots of kind of like fundamental game issues that have not been addressed and that will continue to not be addressed is kind of like my short verdict here. But let's go into the details. So first of all, they talked about mid-season patches. A lot of people have been asking what happens with Season 7, for example, or the ongoing season. There are no more big mid-season updates. So we were just gonna get like mostly patches at the start of the season, so the season launch itself, and then some fixes, like 1-2 weeks or so, and then maybe some very small stuff later on. And this is going to be the model going forward. So my impression is that they're probably just working on expansion 2 for the most part, and they don't want to do like big mid-season updates anymore. And instead they're just gonna kind of let the season run its course after the first like initial, patches, and that's about it. Which I think is not really a bad thing. To be honest, I was not really a fan of mid-season updates. While it was kind of nice to jump in and maybe try out some new builds or so for some people, personally, I don't really want to come back to a season in that sense, basically. So I think this is probably how most people approach this. You kind of play a season, and then at some point you phase out, you play PoE, and then you come back or something. So this is how most people do that, and that includes myself. So I'm not really sad about this. There's also some kind of ominous Battle Pass rework coming, but they haven't really said anything about it. This is going to be later on. Also, speaking of later on, there's going to be a roadmap about the future season updates. I'm not sure until when, maybe the next expansion. We already know that 2026 will be expansion 2. I expect somewhere in like Q1 or Q2 probably, so like a year from now. So like 4 seasons or so. So we're probably going to see like, season 9, 10, 11 or something like that. But we also have to wait and see what happens. Then they have some leveling changes. So basically they said that leveling is too fast, progression is too fast, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. We have seen this in Season 7, like getting to Torment 4 was really easy for anyone who really tried on at least a half decent build. And in fact, they actually showed some numbers. For example, they said that 50% of all players ended up in Torment 4, where initially this was supposed to be some pretty high-end stuff, and they said they actually want more like 10% of people to end up there. So they are making Endgame much harder and Torment 4 much harder to reach. And they're also making leveling a bit slower by reducing the legendary drops, and they're making magic items and rare items a bit more useful. So that's a real good change, I think, because yeah, if you level a fresh character, you kind of just get overwhelmed with that stuff really quickly. I think that's nice. In general, I kind of appreciate less loot, less legendary loot, and I guess especially after like the Whisper season, probably most people kind of feel the same. It's just like fatiguing. But yeah, in terms of the endgame rescaling, Torment 4 is going to become significantly harder, roughly 5 times harder as in Season 7. Now, a lot of high-end builds will like blast through that relatively soon anyway. Pit 76 of the current scaling, which is like 11 pits higher than what it is now on the live server. This is kind of what you can expect. We should also expect a lot of nerfs for the overpowered builds. There's more on that later, but yeah, again, I would expect a lot of the power to come down, like stuff like Bloodwave builds or, you know, other like similar S-tier builds I expect will probably see a reduction in power. And we also have the witch powers dropping out that may or may not be stronger than the new borrowed power theme, which I'm gonna show you in a second. But yeah, overall it means Torment 4 will be a longer progression. It will still be very achievable for basically every build. And in general, just it's gonna be longer to get there, and you might not be able to like, you know, go omega ham on, you know, all the movement speed and, you know, all the cooldown reduction, you know, and just like one-shot everything. So maybe you actually have to invest a little bit into a character to do this, and we'll see how this will play out. And they're also rescaling the pit to have a 20% larger scaling per pit tier. So previously the like expected value was something like 17% per tier multiplicatively. So every pit tier would be like 17, 17, 17, leading to roughly a times 2.2 every 5 tiers, or like roughly a times like 5 or so every 10 tiers. And now that is going to increase to probably something like times 1.2 per pit tier. So basically the scaling is exponentially larger, it goes up much faster, and this also means that as you go to higher and higher pits, like beyond pit 100, for example, going to 110, 120, 130, it will be ridiculously harder compared to what it is now on the live server, which should mean that even if they keep current top builds untouched and don't nerf them, we will probably not see any 150s anymore. Now, I haven't really done like the full like table and mathed it out, but it's probably going to be something like 100 times harder or whatever. You know, exponential scaling is pretty rough. And in that case, we're probably not going to see anyone do 150s at least. And in general, it also means that it might even be a lot of builds that will not be able to finish their glyphs to level 100 anymore, for example. But again, we'll see. Maybe there's going to be some other balance updates here. But overall, this is what we can expect. So Endgame is getting harder when it comes talking about the pit. Torment 4 is getting harder. And the bosses are getting harder. So there are some updates here to the bosses. We have some screenshots of this as well. So we have Belial here, as I said. And they're also reworking the boss ladder. There's like this screenshot here. Basically, there's a few new bosses and also a new ultimate boss, which is Belial here. There's like the small form, which is like this little Belial here. And then there's like the big form where you actually fight like basically the Diablo 3 version of him. And he is like now the ultimate challenge. So he's above the rest of the bosses. And they said all of the bosses were buffed and rebalanced and even got some new abilities. And they also have more HP and whatever. So it seems like they really wanted to introduce a bit of extra challenge here. And together with the Torment 4 overall scaling, this might actually mean that bosses are pretty tanky, at least on Torment 4. Now you'll still be able to do this on like, you know, lower torments and just blast through them. And eventually you're gonna make a build that is probably strong enough to just like destroy them anyway. But it will take a little bit longer to get there. So that's what you can expect here. And yeah, basically the way this works is that now instead of doing a boss rota with a party where everyone spawns the boss and brings the materials, you instead get these keys to access the chest after you kill the boss. So I'm not sure if I have a screenshot of that, but yeah, here's this. So you kill the boss first, you can try it for free, kind of like Lilith, doesn't have an entry cost. And you can decide, you know, do you want to actually attempt it until you kill it, for example, and then you get the chest and you have to pay the cost after the kill. So that's like a relatively good change, I guess. They want to incentivize people to kind of like challenge themselves and try out if they can actually do those bosses, for example, so you can practice them as much as you want and these kind of things. So I think that's kind of nice. It's like a, you know, like a little bit of like, you know, incentive to try and go in instead of just like making a character so powerful to one-shot them. Realistically, I expect most people probably just won't have them anyway. If not on Torment 4, then on Torment 3. And it's going to be kind of like, you know, decent enough loot. So this is how I expect this to go. But it's cool to see that they are actually trying a little bit to make something of those bosses. We'll see how this will play out in practice. We'll be able to test this on the PTR. Also, it will reduce a little bit of the bloat of the materials, for example. So we have the lair keys now. You can also like convert Stygian stones into any of those materials. They can stack higher. And yeah, a bunch of other little things here. And the way that this Belial thing works is that when you defeat one of the bosses, Belial can pop up, it's like a low chance, and then he can double the loot that you get. So you get kind of like a freebie times 2 sometimes. And this Belial then drops the pieces for the big Belial fight. So you kind of have to like do the other bosses, Belial pops up, you kill him, you get the Protea's husks, and then you can do the big fight. And the big fight is special in the way that it allows you to choose the rewards from any of the other bosses, and there's a guaranteed ancestral, and it's just like has better loot basically. It doesn't seem like there's like any exclusive rewards here, it's just like more loot and better rewards or something like that for this Belial fight. Slightly disappointing, I guess, but who knows, maybe the new uniques will actually go to Belial, for example, or maybe they will be distributed among the other bosses that didn't really say that. So yeah, this is what you can expect here. Some other general updates. So they said, for example, they kept ultimate scaling. So I was talking about like nerfing builds, for example, in general. Bloodwave is an example, like Cataclysm is an example. Like in general, Season 7 was full of crazy ultimate skill builds. Death Trap as well, for example. So they're capping this to plus 200% maximum now. And they talked about incidental crowd control. Now, what I mean here is that these are mostly like triggered crowd controls, like Worldly Fortune Temper, Fist of Fate, and these kind of things. And they talk about specifically Fist of Fate and said that I think it basically loses its crowd control effect. They didn't talk about Worldly Fortune, but I do expect that to be nuked as well. At least I hope it will be. And they effectively just want crowd control to be more of an like active choice than just like you trigger them all the time from like random stuff, which I think is a good thing. Now that being said, they did not talk about any compensation for classes that really rely on crowd control, which is basically everything on Rogue. So I do expect RIP Rogue, to be honest. So we'll see. There was no mention of any of that stagger system would get changed, rogues would get any kind of help in terms of how they scale against bosses, or, you know, a reduction in their like crowd control powers, for example, to like have more raw power instead or something like that. Let's hope for the best, but I am not really hopeful here. Yeah, then dots rename, this is mostly a terms change, so shadow damage over time is now corrupting, and lightning damage over time is shocking, cold is frostbite, so in case you see those terms, don't be surprised. And let's talk about the class updates here. So we have a few screenshots of this as well. And we have this here, I'm going to talk about the season theme in a second actually. So the class updates start here. We get a new unique and aspect for every class. For the barbs, they'll get some insane mighty throw stuff where you're gonna one-tap everything basically. So you can do like some giga mighty throw that's you know, once in a while, just kind of like a one-shots everything. That seems kind of wild, and the clickbait will be crazy, that's for sure. Whirlwind is getting buffed, and double swing. In general, they said that they want to move away a little bit from barbs just being completely based on like earthquakes and twisters, which is also something that I really disliked as well ever since season 4. So I'm quite happy to see that we might be seeing a bit of a return to actual core skills. Let's see if there's going to be enough. Not too hopeful, but maybe. Then we have the Druid here. Druid is getting some really cool stuff actually. They're getting a new helm that is similar to the Tempest Roar or the Vasili's Prayer, like the wolf or the bear helm. They get a human helm now, and this one is cracked. From the looks of it. So you'll be able to have 3 different key passives as a druid when you use this helm, as long as you're in human form and you trigger a bunch of stuff. So maybe they're even going to sell their first microtransaction for druids now as well, since you finally have a chance to play a human form druid. So that's kind of cool. They just kind of showed off some little action here, but basically you see these buffs here. So I think these are like the 3 different key passives or so that are active, or like these buffs from the helm. And then like stuff goes crazy, so you get like everything basically, Perfect Storm, Earth and Might, and whatever you choose. So I think that's going to be very fun to try to experiment with that. Then we have the Necros. So I did talk about Bloodwave being too OP. This is already kind of covered here, and I guess it's still going to remain relatively strong unless they like specifically nerfing that even further. And then Bloodlands is getting like especially a big single target buff. Minions is getting some buffs with this new weapon, this aspect here. Mostly like an Army of the Dead related thing. So you're gonna have like these popcorn skellies that go boom and they do damage, and then you have Army of the Dead as like a huge burst cooldown where everything just kind of explodes around you and you shoot these souls out. So that sounds like it could be pretty fun. Not really for me, but maybe the minion enjoyers will love this. Then we have the rogues. They get poison trap stuff mostly, and also yeah, poison trap versus death trap and scoundrel's ladder, so mostly trap stuff here. Rogue is overall in a really good spot anyway. I think they have lots of different options that are really good for late game, but poison trap was always something that was just nothing. And it looks like there might be some kind of viable poison trap build here with those new gloves and this new aspect. Especially the gloves, they could make it pretty interesting. So I'm definitely going to be cooking here and see what you can come up with. But poison trap is something that I tried a long time ago, back in season 0 actually. And it never really got anywhere. And whenever I tried it again, it was still really underwhelming. Dot builds in general are pretty underwhelming in most cases, so we'll see. But maybe they're also going to buff it in case it is too weak here, but they just showed this off a little bit. Could be pretty fun. Then we have the Zorgs. Now, they didn't talk about like any of the fundamental problems and fundamental weakness of Zorg, besides that they said that Zorg is kind of where they want classes to be, and they acknowledge that Zorg is a little bit weak, but they want kind of everyone to be there. But outside of that, they didn't really talk much about what happens to the Zorg, besides showing off this ice shard stuff here in this new aspect. So they're getting a new helm that may or may not be better than a Shaco or a Perdition helm, but this is what you get. Personally, I'm quite excited for ice shards. I was actually thinking about making one in season 7 already, but then I didn't. But maybe with this helm, I'm gonna make one in season 8. And you're gonna shoot like some kind of like multi-shot ice shard here. So this is what this looks like. Kind of cool. And maybe it's gonna be good enough. They did not actually show what cracking energy and meteor changes are, so we just hope for the best here, I guess. Then you have the Spiritborn. Spiritborn is getting a pretty interesting Rushing Claw aspect and a new Storm Feather amulet that effectively recreates Righteous Fire in Diablo 4. So if you know Path of Exile, we have like a screenshot here. You have this huge fire, like tornado or like whirling stuff around you. Basically, as you pick up feathers, it kind of grows and gets more powerful. So this is what this does. And this may be, at least like speed farming wise, pretty good if you get to the point where you can actually kind of kill everything in Torment 4 of this. We'll see. And this Rushing Claw thing does sound pretty interesting as well. So you kind of like incentivize to stack a lot of charges of Rushing Claw and then kind of like, you know, time it and position yourself in a way where you just like do like one insane Rushing Claw through a pack and everything just kind of melts or so. But it's not like Toxic Scum build, for example, which is like Rushing Claw back and forth. So yeah. This is what this looks like here. Overall, I think interesting class changes. They kind of looked at the right stuff that was underutilized, but we'll see if like this stuff is actually going to be like better than the existing builds. So, you know, we have to see the patch notes, we have to see the PTR, but usually new stuff is kind of good or will be buffed at least. Now let's talk about the season theme real quick. I showed this briefly earlier. So there is actually a relatively cool season theme, which is like this stuff here. It is related to this boss rework. So there's gonna be this so-called apparition incursions. They kind of like pop up everywhere on the world map. It's not like a full zone takeover like we had with Hell Tides or Vampire Tides, whatever. But instead you get kind of like these little events, and then there's like a bunch of bosses spawning, and at the end there's like a Belial popping up. And then this Belial can, I think, also give you the mats for the big Belial fight. And yeah, you can get these boss powers here. So this is what it looks like. It's like similar to the vampire powers or the witch powers. You have this interface here. You can socket one main power at the top and then 3 modifier powers at the bottom. And every power has either a main effect or a modifier effect depending on where it goes. So 1 and 3. And you can kind of like build your own boss power. And they showed off a few examples here, which is kind of cool actually. So here's, for example, Wandering Death's chest beam. So it kind of just rotates around you like on the world boss. They showed us this Lilith Wind of Hate. So every time you cast, you get like these spikes coming out here. It's not that great on a screenshot, but I guess you get the idea. Duriel's Burrow. So you go like underground. You can actually move around. Urivar's Locked Bombs. There's like explosions everywhere. Grigar's Lightning Squares. So yeah. They look really cool. I wonder how impactful they will be, but I guess the idea is that they will definitely like change things up a little bit in an interesting way. Looks like another kind of borrow power / power creep season, but at least a pretty fun concept, but nothing really innovative here, unfortunately. So yeah, this is what we got here for the most part, and this pretty much also sums it up with the Campfire chat. Now, as I said at the start, I believe that what they have shown is actually relatively good. I like the boss theme, I like the boss rework, I like the season theme is fun. The new items and the skills that they're trying to buff here is a really good target. I like the leveling changes, the endgame rebalance. I think all of that was kind of needed, but a lot of stuff is also just missing. So I mentioned, for example, stagger mechanics. We'll see, but I think it's gonna mean rip rogue, at least in like high tier pits. You will not be able to kill any bosses, for example, if you don't stagger them. So we'll see. And yeah, a lot of stuff is just not addressed. So snapshotting skills like Dance of Knives, Cataclysm, this kind of like long duration effects. The runes that go with that, like the Sun rune, for example, has not been mentioned. I guess they did actually talk about leaderboards very briefly in like a Q&A section at the end. This is something that is like top of their mind for like the last 2 years, basically. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, right now, nothing to announce here, I guess. The Grim Favor turn-in with the Raven is not mentioned to come back, because that is actually part of Season 7, I think, and the Whisper Zones, unless they kind of stick around. I don't think so. At the very least, the Witch Powers will phase out. I'm not sure about the Whisper Hunts, or like I'm not sure about the Witch Hunt Zones and the Ravens, so maybe that's gonna be very clunky again. Trick attacks on the Rogue specifically is like a huge problem that has not been addressed. Loot bloat and like too much loot and loot filters is not addressed. Boss rota farming. They did say that they expect people to do like less boss rotas and less boss killing in general. And with the new system, there is a bit of a bonus for doing it in a group, but it's not like ×4 like it was in the past. So I guess you can do it more as a solo player, and it's not going to be such a feels bad man moment. But in general, he's going to go in and at some point just kind of like one-tap the bosses, get loot, do that 5 times in a row, TP out, TP in, yada, yada, yada. So I expect that kind of pattern to continue exactly as it was. And that's also a bit annoying, I gotta say. I was hoping that they would maybe also like rework how the loot works and you get like, higher quality, less amount of loot. Just like this year in general, like just less loot. I think we just need less loot. There's too much stuff. Gotta say, in Season 7, very early on, I just kind of completely stopped picking up any non-ancestral item, like basically on like day 3 or something. And I never looked back, basically. So I was hoping something would be done here, but it's not. Tempering and masterworking has also not been addressed. So that seems to be completely unchanged so far. A lot of people have been giving feedback, including myself, about how those systems could become more fun and more engaging, but nothing is being done. Stash space and runes, also not mentioned. And also all of the existing content. So Pit, okay, they rescaled the difficulty a bit, but it didn't really fix any fundamental issues like missing monsters, missing floors, RNG, the bosses, lots of stuff. I have like a 50-minute video on that, basically. You can watch that if you want. Undercity, Horde, Sniper Dungeons, Citadel, so none of the old content has been addressed, and I think that's a huge L, at least on that part. So a lot of people are also like saying, like, for example, like, yeah, where's the endgame and so on. Okay, it's getting a bit harder, like the ceiling is a lot higher, and okay, we're not going to see 150, and getting to Torment 4 will be harder, and so on. But I don't think that the reworked bosses will be enough to really keep like at least the blasters really engaged. I think we're going to get to the point where you just one-shot them, and this is going to be the end of the season for most people, So this is kind of what I expect. And a lot of the fundamental issues of the existing content has not really been talked about, so that makes me a bit sad. But yeah, this is kind of the rundown here of what you can expect. Again, this is before I took a look at the patch notes, so there will be an update from me later on, and you can expect that there's probably going to be a lot of details about individual build changes and so on that we're going to go through. Of course, we're going to be updating all the maxwell guides for Season 8 in time and these kind of things, so you can expect that down the line. But for now, we're going to focus on the PTR and see what comes out of it. And yeah, for this, I gotta say, let's hope that maybe something comes more out of the PTR, and maybe some cool changes will make it like into the patch that we haven't really heard yet. But overall, I gotta say, it seems a bit of like a repeat of Season 7 with a slightly better progression, cooler bosses, and yeah, probably a relatively short season again for most people, including myself. So we'll see. I've been mostly on like the PoE train lately, and I did play, for example, Season 7 a lot less than I have previous seasons, and it seems like it will kind of just continue that pattern. I might last for like maybe a few weeks and not like all season long, for example. But okay, it will probably be fun for a while, just like how it was in Season 6 or Season 7, and then it will kind of like phase out rather soon. It's like my expectation right now. So this is what I got here. Hope you enjoyed my little rundown. I will link the Campfire and you know, anything else that is important here, the patch notes, down in the description, so you can go check that out. Otherwise, stay tuned. Hope you have a good one, and see you guys next time.